Today is February, is it the 4th? I believe it's the 4th, yeah, February 4th, 1997. And I'm at the home of Polly Davis and her den. And could you tell me a little about yourself? Were you born on Harkers Island?
I was, right.
Okay.
12 to 24.
Wow. And were you always a member of the Methodist Church, or were you United Methodist Church?
Well, that was always my home church, but I actually became a member of it when I was 15.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
still a member.
Yeah, that's great. And was that your family's church as well?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. For the most part, most of us were always Methodist, and of course, as the years went on, different ones. I had a sister who, of course, became a member of another church, and but for the most part, all of us remain to be still at least be leaning that way. Some not too active, but
yeah,
we're still. That's basically the family church.
Yeah. Would you say, this is just occurring to me, but do folks on Harkers Island, do they sometimes change churches when they marry into another church?
To some
so
degree,
to
as I just remarked, my sister, one of my sisters did that. That's the reason she left the church. You know, it's not always because of a difference of opinions or a difference in beliefs, but sometimes intermarrying or marrying into other churches, they will branch out or leave the church and go to another church. And, for the most part, though, our family are still Methodist, I'd say, for the most part.
Let's see, you helped write this history of the church.
Correct.
And how did you go about researching this? I know there's a lot of details in it, but
well, that was our big problem. We didn't have much of a resource. We had a few church records, conference records, but mostly it was through the older people, and especially my uncle, Uncle Alan Moore, who was a young man or a child when the church was first organized over at Shackleford Banks. That is, speaking of the Methodist Episcopal Church South, which is now the church that the building that houses, actually the same building that houses the United Methodist Church as it is today.
I see. Wow.
That sort of was the beginning,
Your uncle actually remembered the church
he
on Shackleford
he had
Banks.
a good memory. Uncle Alan
Wow.
was sort of comical with it, but he had a very good memory. And I think even in court one day, they were trying to settle some land issue concerning Shackleford Banks, and he just, he was one that told it like it was. It may not have been in a polished manner, but he told me he just had the whole court laughing, almost hysterical. And one of the lawyers says, well, now we need more than that, just a hearsay. And I recall the judge saying, listen, says, any man who can think back that far and give the story that he did, he said, I accept it as evidence, And his terminology that he used, like so many feet from such and such a point, such and such a stake or whatever. And
wow.
that was acceptable. And a lot of my information I received from Uncle Alan, and there were others who contributed that I would contact. But he was the main source of our information, plus the church records that we had, and our own thoughts that we, as a filler in, you had to do some of that to bring it all together.
Right.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that. You had to surmise to some degree. And so we came up with what we did that we think is rather adequate in a truth and in fact, and some of it may be just, what we thought. Just our own thoughts. And we have several people who assisted with this. There's Wanda Willis Edna Davis. I know at least two other than myself that helped put this book together.
Yeah.
Different
That's great.
sections. I know Edna did a section, and Wanda Willis helped me with the first section that we did,
Mm-hmm.
and then the rest of it from different kinds. Being a church historian, I think, and already involved with it, I sort of compiled it all
Mm-hmm.
as you have it there today.
That's
The
great.
brief history of the Harkers Island Methodist Church.
And you are the church historian?
No, not
Oh,
at this
okay.
time.
Oh, okay.
Not at this time, but I was
You were there.
during some periods of
Mhm.
time when this was being written. So.
Mm-hmm. They kept records then from the Banks Church?
I think that's been one of our fallen. We've fallen down in that we didn't have the records we should have had. But I know the
Mhm.
Straits Methodist Church had some interesting documents and records that I had access to, and I drew a lot from that.
Oh.
To, you know, a little more than just something by word of mouth. It
I
really
see.
helped.
Yeah. Is there still a Methodist church on Straits?
Oh
Yeah,
yes.
there is.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I didn't realize that. Tell me about you were describing the singing as you knew about it at the Banks Church. What they did for.
Well, of course, I didn't know a
No.
lot about it.
Yeah.
Still don't know, but according to Uncle Alan, they didn't have the hymn books as we have today. They probably couldn't afford them.
Mm-hmm.
They just didn't have access to them. And also, I think it was a trend in those days that you had a song leader,
Uh-huh.
and the song leader would raise a song, and the little congregation would just join in with the song leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting. He probably would sing a phrase or a few measures, and the people would, follow after him or repeat it together. But nevertheless, that was, as my understanding is, what I gathered from him, they really did not have hymn books.
Mm-hmm.
And they had their protractive meetings. It was always interesting to me. Sort of hard these days to get revival services together. People have sort of, I don't know, waned away. The trend has changed. But even in those days when transportation isn't what we have today,
Right.
people had to travel by boat. And I know that when they had these, what we would call revival services, meetings, they called them protracted meetings.
Ah.
And the reason for that was they got the Holy Spirit was doing a good work, which if he does a work, it's a good work. But as long as the Holy Spirit led and promoted the people and motivated the people to continue on, these meetings just continued on. They didn't say we're going to have 1 week's meeting or 2 weeks. It went on as long as the Holy Spirit was working in the midst, and the ministers, the people felt it's, to keep on, but when it was time to stop, they stopped.
Wow.
And of course you can imagine, and they would be held under the trees.
Mm.
They'd have the benches along the way that people could sit on. Didn't have a big church. That the one-room schoolhouse served as the church also. But in the summertime, these had to have these, and I could hear the singing through the trees almost. Of course, I wasn't there because my father was only 14 when the family left. They were one of the last families. My family was to leave Shackleford Banks.
Oh, really?
They just hated to give it up.
Yeah.
And of course, they took the closest island, piece of land that they came to when they left the Banks, which is only about maybe 10 minutes away from where they lived. And that was the way they had this. And during the daytime, the women would have their iron pots going, and they'd be cooking. The people would come from other places in their schooners or in their boats, whatever type boat they had, and they would eat together during the daytime, and at night they'd have these protracted meetings. And with this type of this singing and all, it sort of, you almost can feel yourself there at the time this is happening. And they were real revivals. It revived the people and stirred them up to urge them to move on and to get excited about the church work and the Lord's work. So, but music, I think, was a very important part of the life of that community as it is this one today. Has continued to be that way. Hope we don't ever lose it. I like progress, and there's been a lot of progress made in the ministry of music, in the field of music in this community, but I hope we don't lose that natural, God-given talent that has been so prevalent and such a part of this community, and I really think has made it an outstanding community in the field of music because of that. And I hate, while I appreciate the improvement, the training that has come into this community, and we have lots of people who are trained in this community to really sing, trained musicians, trained singers, but still hold on to that part that I'm speaking of that didn't come from man, it came from God.
Right.
And I hope we always hold on to that.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful when we have, like in our church, for instance, Ruth Taylor. She is, everybody I think in this community would admit, she's one of the greatest musicians we've ever had into the life of this community. But she incorporates, she knows music, but she incorporates that natural tendency and that natural talent, which makes her music so beautiful. Her touch, because it's like a preacher preaching from his script or preaching from the heart. She's playing from the notes, but she's playing from the heart also. And it's all the way down to the tips of her fingers. I mean, it's she expresses this thing that I'm talking about. It's hard to put into words, but she expresses that.
Right.
And it has to be more beautiful because it is coming from the heart. So.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to put it. The Banks. What was your father's name?
Aaron. It's Uncle Alan. I spoke to Uncle Alan. My father was his brother. Of course, they had one in Tyree, which you see a lot of in the history of the Carter County Moors. That's a word. That's a name that has been handed down.
Okay, was the last name
through
Moore?
the years. Moors,
Okay,
right? That's Alfred, Aaron, Tyree, and Alan. They were the brothers.
And they were all born on Shackleford Banks?
They were all born on Shackleford Banks.
Wow.
And of course they had two sisters, Callie and Carrie. And they were all born there. My father was 14 when they moved from Shackleford Banks to Harkers Island.
Are there other families? Put it on again. I was asking about other families that were on Shackleford Banks that you know of. Did they stay with the Methodist Church when they came over here with the Southern Methodist Church?
Well, of course, most of those now they have passed on. And as churches began to, the Methodist Church, the split business started. We have lots of other churches, I think, quite a few for such a small community. So the families coming up and marrying into these other churches. But I'm thinking of one, the Divine Guthrie family, that I think certainly some of his descendants, some of his people would still be involved in our church. And
now he was very instrumental in I think from what I've read in the cookbook, right?
Yes,
yeah.
he was. I'm glad I mentioned him because he was a great, very important part of the ministry of the church over on Shackleford Banks.
Okay.
Really, as I recall, I'm speaking from the heart here now and remembering a little of it, but the work over there, the Methodist Church, really consisted of two parts. They called it two parts. They had the Diamond City community area and also the Wade Shore community, which is where my family came from. And so I think he was known sort of like an exhorter. You see, they didn't have a living, they didn't have a pastor, a parsonage such as that. The preacher would have to come from the Straits Methodist Church by boat. Someone would come over and get him, take him to the banks perhaps to spend the night, or early the next morning. And so in between times, they had to have these exhorters or people who took care of the community. I guess we determined it would be equal or equivalent today to the lay leader of the church, spiritual leader, who took care of the people's needs that a pastor would ordinarily perform and take care of. So Mr. Divine Guthrie was, I think he filled that capacity for the Diamond City area, served in that capacity. But when they come together for the conferences, they were all part of the same church. It's sort of like when we started out, we were part of the Straits, or at least at one point we were 4-point charge, all one charge. We are station church, all one charge, but there'd be like 2, 3, or 4 parts or points to that charge, meaning 2, 3, or 4 churches who were a part of that charge.
Okay.
And so the banks, that was similar, the eastern part of the banks, and not too far away, maybe a couple miles, 3 miles in between. But in those days, it was awfully difficult to have to meet the needs of people when the only way you had to travel was by boat. And so he worked in that capacity. But I do know the family. We still have some of his probably grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who would be affiliated to some degree with our church, that still comes to some degree. Somewhere down the line, his line, because I'm not that familiar with him and all his family tree, but I do know we have some of his relatives still today.
Could you talk a little about how there were the 2 Methodist churches on Harkers Island, and about the split and how they tried to unite them? And
you're talking about unification back in 1939, yes.
You said you remembered
to begin
a little bit of
with, of course, the
that.
first church was what we call the Northern Methodist Church, or Methodist Episcopal Church North.
Okay.
And then the church that came later from the Banks, Shackleford Banks, I think about 1903 maybe was the first. I shouldn't be quoting these dates because I'm not that much on.
You say roughly, and that's all right.
Right. But anyway, the Methodist Episcopal Church South was affiliated with the Straits Methodist Church, which was not called the Straits Church as it is today, the Straits United Methodist Church. And so sort of sister churches use the same pastor and all. When they were at the Banks, the pastor from the Straits, I think I've already said that. But there were 2 churches, 2 groups of people. In 1939, when unification was supposed to take place, these 2 churches being a part of that unification, and due to a lot of adverse circumstances and situations, I say with regret that unification was not as successful here as it was in a lot of churches. I think perhaps the people with all their differences, and also the pastor who was sent here did not understand these conditions, and maybe it wasn't dealt with in the best way. And so out of it all, because of these differences, which I'd rather not go into in too much detail.
Sure.
In other words, it was not a 100% unified situation. So it culminated actually into a split. They couldn't continue operating both churches, so we had to be united. Whomever stayed, we had to be united into one church. Well, it seems that most of the people who were willing to go along with the unification seemed to be those who had been members or participants and attenders into the Methodist Church South. So there was out of that establishment of another organization or another organized church. We started out to be the Free Grace Prayer Band. And then that became, I think, the Pilgrim Holiness Church, and then I think the Wesleyan Church, as I understand it to be today. And so, and of course from that and other, we have gained more and more churches because of differences of opinions. And feeling the necessity to reorganize or organize another church that they could feel free to worship the way they chose and desired.
Right.
I think that's what this country is about to begin with.
Mhm.
Settlements of people coming from other countries because of their religious beliefs. And
Right.
it's an ongoing thing. I mean, it continues to be that way. While I'm not personally so much for it, I wish we could be closer knit with our teachings and with our church work. But then there is a good side of it too. The more churches you have, maybe the more people you'll have. Even though we do have our differences of opinions. And as you heard me say Sunday, I just wish we could all reach that common denominator, being the founder of the church, Jesus Christ. I mean, the head of the church, being Jesus Christ, God, the head of God's church, and dwell together and work together on the basis of who He was and is and will always be, and the one that we should be worshiping and working together for. And how great the witness could be in this community if we could see this, instead of dwelling so much on the different facets, the different, well, you could call it essentials and non-essentials. A lot of times it was the non-essentials, I think, that helps bring about the split.
Right.
And essentially, unity, to me, is one of the greatest elements in the life of the church or your home or any community. With togetherness, you can do anything with God's help. But where there's dissension and division, disunity, you're going to have nothing but splits and breaking up and problems, because a house divided against itself cannot stand. It will not stand. It shall not stand, as the word says. And I think this has been one of the things in this community, with all the potential it had to bring the people together to God. There's been too much emphasis put on bringing them together in our particular denomination.
Right.
And no disrespect to anyone's denomination when I said that, but I think if our priorities were different, I think about what this community could do if we could work together and have as our reason and the common denominator that would bring us down, bring us together the most, would be Jesus Christ. Lift Him up, and not the founders of my church or somebody else's church, or as important as they were and could have been or should have been. I'd like to see that in this community. When I think, speaking of music, how great and how wonderful it could be. I'd love one time to just have, one big Harkers Island choir.
Yeah.
Consisting of the voices of all those people in all the churches together. What great music it could be. What wonderful music. What a witness it could be. To people not only in this community, but throughout the state, the whole world, whomever you come in contact with. If 12 disciples did what they did in Jesus' day, what could all the leaders, alone just the leaders in all these churches in this little community, what we could do if we worked together?
Yeah.
And I'd like to see that sometime, maybe. If not, I know we'll see it in heaven.
Yeah. You were speaking last Sunday about a time that there was an all-island choir, or there were, that all the denominations got together. Was it a Christmas sing?
It was a Christmas. We didn't have a name because I think it lasted maybe we did this twice.
Yeah.
But there was a move to get all the singers who wanted to participate from all the churches, and I think we have maybe 2 churches now we did not have then. So there must have been at least 6. I'll say at least 6 of the churches, 5 or 6 of the churches.
Right.
Under the leadership of Hester Guthrie and Ruth Taylor. Ruth Taylor was the pianist. I was speaking of her a little while ago. And Ruth Hester, she was the director of this choir. And I guess thinking back on that is why I feel so much. I saw what happened in that. I saw the unity, the togetherness, the blending of the voices. And you might say the best of each church, anyone who wanted to, and I think it was a good representation of the best. Yeah. And it was wonderful. The rehearsing was wonderful, the working together, And the final performance had to be, because if you're together in anything, it's going to be better, you know.
Mm-hmm.
When you work together, when you're a unified effort,
Yes.
the result has to be good. And it really was good. And don't want to sound like a false pride here, but it was something for this community to appreciate
Right.
and to respect. And most of all, I think the work that went into it and the unified effort that went into it, which tells me what this community could do if we just work together more, not on the basis of what church you're from or what denomination you represent, but that common denominator, that united effort, the witness that went from that, and the attendance was great,
Mm-hmm.
and it was good for a community of singers where you find, and certainly at that time, really not too many trained professional voices.
Right.
But it worked together for good. It really did, and I'd love to see that again sometime.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of work and a lot of effort, but you usually do what you want to do. We just have to make the time for it.
Right.
And I'd just like to see that happen again, because certainly the talent has not decreased in this community. It grows with our youth and in a more professional, more trained way, which I say go to it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. I
Mm-hmm.
would like to see that grow, and I would certainly promote it if I could.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not to forget our beginnings, you know, where it came from,
Right.
where we came from.
Yeah.
But that's the best I can remember about that particular situation.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly an inspiration. It really is. I think Karen told me, I'm not sure if I have it straight, but were you choir director at the Methodist
For
Church?
approximately 16 years.
Oh my goodness.
Ray West was our pastor back in, I think, about 58,
Mm-hmm.
and for about 6 years, and 5 to 6 years, and his wife, who is a trained musician. We had always had, every church in this community always had its music.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember as just a young girl during funerals and Christmas programs and anything special, we always had the choir on Sunday morning. Whoever would come up in the choir, won't you come help us sing?
I see.
But we had
Yeah.
never been really organized. I know in a
Mhm.
funeral, I was around, please come to church, help. We have a funeral. We need you to come help us.
Oh, really?
But thank the
Wow.
Lord for the day when she came and officially organized our choir. And it
Oh,
made such a
okay.
difference. And she did wonders to God with God's help for our choir. And for a country church choir, I think it has turned out to be pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
At times better than others. But when I say that, there again, that united effort. We know who's supposed to be there. You don't have to beg from the congregation. So we have a much better situation than we did then.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen times when it was maybe better than it is right now. You know, you go through growing spurts, and then you have your little falling
Sure.
downs, and weak times and strong times. But I think in any church, next to the preaching of the word, there's nothing more important than the ministry of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think any church would say that. And this community has been blessed. Each and every one of the churches, so far as I know, they're really blessed in that area. Not just ours. You were asking about ours. But anyway, when they left, getting back to your question, I was asked to take the choir, which I did. I'm certainly not a trained musician, but I love to sing. I love to hear groups. It's more than just beautiful music. It's the fact that you're working together in unity on something. And music, if it's not united of all things, will not be beautiful. It may be a noise, but it won't exactly be a joyful one if you're
Right.
not. So I think that's what blesses me about it, and it is a tool of praise, a way of praising, and we've been blessed, and like I say, I believe that each and every church in this community has been blessed, and of course after I being gone away for different reasons and all. Beverly Johnson, I know she assisted me a lot and filled in when I couldn't, and then she had 14 to 16 years.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
Gwen Baker gave us a hand at different times. We just use whatever the Lord sends our way to the best advantage that we can, and still being able to participate in it today. I'm assistant to Pearl Lewis. Pearl Lewis is our choir director now, doing a good job. And but there's always room for improvement in what we do to get the bung in it.
Yes. Well, I was just curious about specific songs that are there any that stand out in your mind that maybe we could backtrack if you know of any songs that were sung way back when you were in the church, when you talking about folks just singing from the heart and that sort of thing. Were there any particular hymns or things that really express that to you?
Well, just, from the first thing that I thought about when you started that, I think that if I had to pick two songs, well, number one would be among all the churches. Amazing Grace is one that I think would go back as far as any hymn books I've had access to. And of course, the Old Rugged Cross is another one. There you go. You really have it all in that. About Easter, the Easter story, the Old Rugged Cross, relating to that. And Amazing Grace is what it's all about. The very beginning, God's grace. Those two, they just come to me. I just feel like for most of the congregations, most of the people, if you had to ask what would be the two most outstanding songs or hymns, I think Amazing Grace would be would be a winner there.
Yeah.
And of course, there are many others, and that's another. Music has changed so much, but yet, different versions even of a lot of the old songs, but they come and go. These new songs come and they go, and especially in an organized choir, they have a tendency to learn something like in a cantata, and then it'll just lie there.
I see.
And you don't use it too much. But these old hymns still coming up. They're just as effective today and just as beautiful as they ever were.
Yeah.
And I think with the TV ministries, the gospel singing we hear, it changes fast, and everybody catches onto it, and it's good. I like different music. But I think that old music is hard to get away from, and I hope we never do.
Right. Do you feel that they, does the choir today, do they make a point of including some of the older hymns?
Well, I can only speak for our church because I'm not that much now in the worship services of the other churches. I don't want this to sound just like just a Methodist thing.
Yeah.
But we do. We try to incorporate all different types of music, not only from the hymn books and in the congregational singing, but especially the special singing or the choir singing. We try to, the director will come up with something, I don't like that one. Why do we want to sing that? But you see what relates to one may not relate to another, or what doesn't relate to me may relate to someone else. So we've always tried, I think we have pretty well done this, to use different types of music. All has a story to sell, and to tell and to sell. And if our mission is being carried out, it should be scriptural.
Right.
But the wording, the method, the type, and the lyrics, and the music itself. One will do for you what it won't do for someone else. It's like the preacher preaching. You may hear half the congregation, that was congregation on Sunday morning, say, that was a good sermon. And some it may not have been. It may not have related to everyone alike, and I don't think it does all the time. And so the same way with music. We all have a different ear for music. And what I like, you may not like. So I always try to adopt that as my policy. And I think we pretty well do that today. To incorporate all different kinds of music that will relate.
Mm-hmm.
No, you got your fast pieces, you have your slow pieces, you have your hand clapping music and your foot patting music, and I like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are those that like the slower type, that listen to the message in the song.
Right.
Means more than just the music,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But there's nothing wrong with either one of them, so far as I'm concerned. If you have a good mixture,
Yeah.
then you're satisfying somebody every Sunday. And maybe now and then you may touch each person. Because to me, that is second to nothing but the preaching of the Word itself. The Word and the preaching of the Word is music.
Mm-hmm.
And how much the Bible speaks about music and the importance of it.
Yeah, that's true.
And making a joyful noise. Yeah.
Mm.
And maybe sometimes that's all we do. It may not even be too joyful, but making if we're doing it for the right purpose, I think that makes that is a big thing within a choir. What is your purpose for singing? Is it to perform?
Mm-hmm.
Just to do a job? Or do you mean it from the heart? Just like I said, the
Right.
difference in a preacher preaching. If he preaches from script, that's fine. But if he's preaching from the heart, that's finer.
Mm-hmm.
That's better.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with incorporating the two. And so singing from the heart. You know, we had one man, Paul Lewis, he said one time, says, we don't sing by note and we don't sing by ear. We sing by letter. We let her fly.
Oh,
And, you know, to be free, have a free spirit, to come out and
Mhm.
sing in the spirit, to worship in the spirit and in truth. That
Mhm.
makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Stand with a face a yard long and you're
Mhm.
singing praises to God. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
it grieves the heart of God instead of, you know,
Right.
fulfilling your purpose of worship. And the same way with the congregation.
Yeah.
You sing a song, a joyful song, and it looks so sad that everybody wonders what's wrong with you. I mean, there's
Yeah,
something to be
that's
said
true.
about that. How you even
Yeah.
look in the choir. You should look happy.
Yeah.
How can you sing a happy song if you're sad or mad or whatever?
Hmm. That's true. Now you sang a duet. Who was the man you sang with this past Sunday?
Fernie Willis.
Fernie Willis.
Uh-huh.
I see.
Yeah, we've been singing together quite a while, and with his wife in a trio, Lola, his wife Lola,
Oh.
and different groups.
Mhm.
Depends what the occasion calls for. We do different things like that, and people. That's another thing in this community. I don't know of another community or many churches that has we call them specials. Doesn't mean that they're specials. When you say
Mhm.
special, you're speaking of a solo, duet, trio, quartet, sextet, and that type thing.
That's
That's
the
the special.
Okay.
Not meaning that you're a special, you're better than anyone else, but this is special. We want to hear special today. It means you want a solo, trio, duet, or whatever.
I see.
And each church, I believe, has that in this community. I'm pretty sure each one has a lot of that, and that keeps the interest going. It's really it's joyful, but it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
If you love the Lord, you love the one you're singing about, and I think singing itself, you know, we were brought up with that. Children were in the evenings, we sat out on our porches, and people would sing.
Oh,
Just sit out on the
wow.
porch, sing, or in the children playing. It was a tool we played with. It was something that we had, and you didn't have to have books. In the schools, it was a very important part of our school, and
Wow.
Harkers Island School had it. It really did.
Mm.
And I hope that doesn't sound too egotistical, but
No.
we did, and not bragging. That's just the way it was. It was noted for its singing.
Wow.
And there again, we were in a collected situation where we were not represented in one particular church. We sang in the schools,
Oh,
and
no
the good
kidding.
singing that was done through the schools and throughout the community. If it was a funeral, maybe a morbid sound here, but
No,
a
it's fine.
funeral, we didn't have a problem if the funeral was held in a home. and the singers stood over the casket or out on the porch. You sang whether you had the music or not. You get together and sing, because that was a tradition. That was a talent. That's the way it was. And we have grown into higher heights and deeper depths in music, but I still appreciate looking back and thinking how the Lord blessed this community in that way. And I think that's the most prevailing thing. That's the thing that I'm looking at and I appreciate so much. And so even the children, if you're out on the boat or whatever, and sit in a car. I know when my youngest sister passed away, she loved to sing, and just, I'd say maybe a couple of days before she passed away, we struck up on a song.
Wow.
And she was singing her part. And I know that, I hesitate to say this because it may, I don't know, it may sound, but anyway, I'm going on with it. But anyway, a patient across the room, I remember when we went out, when I went out of the room, some lady, she had the door, she was listening, she said, that was the most heavenly music. Now, here's a dying woman. She was just a day or two before passing away. I don't remember exactly the days or the hours. But she tried, as long as she was trying to sing, and I just, how I wish, you can't take a tape recorder with you all the time, but how I wish I had that.
Oh, yeah.
And nowhere do I have her voice or nothing, or my older sister between Ramona and myself. How we used to sing, Sis, we called her,
Yeah.
a cousin, over Gray Moore. How she could sit down and tear a piano up and didn't know a note in the world, I don't believe. It was all natural and hard to explain, but this was a part of our lives. Whether at play, at school, or wherever, you found a time. And somewhere along the line, I mean, and our church was not as active at that point. But somehow this talent came out, and it's throughout the whole community.
Well,
Most of the special singers, and I clarified what special means.
right, exactly.
I think came into play into the homes and into our church, and maybe at play or whatever. The Rose people who's so noted, the Nelsons now, the Rose family. It was born a natural thing in that community, in that family. Speaking of community, but this is in that family. Their mother taught them. Clint Nelson, who's such a good singer of the group. My nephew sings with them, and things come through families. I don't know what it is. You know, like the Roses, all they had to do was sit down to the piano, and they could play the piano, and they can sing. It's amazing how, and the Lord is the one who gives His talents. Yeah. And all the churches, you could say the same thing about all of them. Of course, the Nelsons, you know, this is an outstanding group. They sing, and they are known.
Yes.
Near and far, or far and near, and everybody knows him. But it wasn't something they learned from a book. It was a talent that the Lord instilled in that family, and is still visiting throughout the years and throughout the generations, I think, of that family. Just to give that, for an example, that one particular family, which mostly, I think, represents the Free Grace Church now, if you wanted to. Two of them. One, the fellowship, the young man who was at the meeting Sunday.
Yes, I was going to ask, and you kind of answered, but I was wondering if the church was primarily where you learned to sing or did your singing when you were coming up, but it sounds like it was in all different facets.
Right. I think it would be a combination of three ways. We had three resources. Number one, in the homes, and on the playgrounds, in the yards when we were playing or whatever.
Yeah.
The talent was there. But of course, in the early years, the most training we had would be through the school. The singing that was done through the school.
I see.
Which were all a part of the same cause, only one school, so we were together in that.
Yeah.
And then from there to our individual churches. And the beautiful singers in all this church. The Mormon church, I'm telling you, they have a wonderful group there who sings. The Pentecostal church. You heard Manly Rose speaking about his church, the group of young people they have in the Refuge Fellowship Church. Grace Holiness, great, wonderful singers. The Baptist Church has their own, and as I don't attend these churches a whole lot, but when I know they have good singers, and they have people who are trained to a different degree, and maybe one church may have more. Free Grace Church is another. I think I've mentioned just about all of them.
Yeah.
Don't mean to let one out, and but it's just been an important part of this community and of the church and the school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember an incident, somebody was talking about that on, I think it was Sunday, when my two sisters and they had what they call this Children's Hour in Raleigh on a radio station there.
Oh.
And I don't know how, I couldn't tell you how this came about, but someone took these young people to Raleigh.
Really?
In those days, that I don't think we even had the bridge then. That was in the days of the ferry. Everything was by boat, and those who had cars had to use a ferry. And they took a group of young people. I don't remember all who went. I was not with that group, but my two younger sisters were, and they sang as a trio. Now, what I'd give for
My
a tape of that
goodness.
today.
Oh, yeah.
And such as that, and another one I'd like to mention. Thinking back, speaking of this other thing I wanted to mention, this is of interest. I don't remember the band. I don't too much about it because I think it happened in the late 20s.
Wow.
I'd say between 25 and 1920 and 25 and 1930, or maybe during the Depression years, maybe. That a man named Ralph Sanders. I don't know where he came from, but he and his wife's mother lived and died here. And he was organized a children's choir connected with the school, and as far back as that. And I understand, it's real effective and real interesting. But that's about all the details I have on that. But they did have a little band, even that far back.
Oh, that's
I'm sure the
really
son in this
interesting.
community could tell you more about that than I could.
Yeah.
That's just how I didn't know this. I was going to have to be asked these questions. So, but I remember that how I don't know much about the organization of it, but I know they did have a band, and he was the one who directed it and was the organizer of it.
So the school really had a strong music program.
Absolutely. Any programs or anything that went on in the school, I think music was the key thing other than the education itself. Always played an important part, and as you asked a little while ago, these musicians that we have now, these singers, most of it I think began right in the school. The talent was there, but the school detected and discovered and cultivated and motivated these talents into bringing out the school. It's like the churches today. That was a very important part, music was, in chapel programs we have, which regretfully we don't have now. And any programs, that music was just such an important part, and a memory, something you never forget. And we don't think about it. Like now, I'm thinking about it, but we don't think about how great and how wonderful, how precious it was. Take it for granted. I think it has been taken for granted over the years.
Yeah.
Probably realizing to appreciate it more. As we talk about like this, I get nostalgic because I think about those times. Walking the roads. We'd walk down the road with the group and just strike up on a song, or something. It was just a part of our lives, very important part of our lives.
Are there any particular songs you remember your family singing, or things that, I was just curious what sort of songs?
Well, I think for the most part, it would go right back to the church.
Yeah.
It would be either the religious church songs,
Right.
or patriotic things pertaining to school.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because in those days we sang, like in the chapel, we sang church songs
Right.
and baccalaureate sermons, services, and all that. Everything was it was free and open
Yeah.
to these tools that we used in the church. They were welcome. They were used in the schools too. But of course, you had your other secular type music that were used. But I think in all of it, without a doubt in my mind, that the church music was the most prevalent one. Because I'm glad to say that, because that's where it all, we have to give the Lord credit for all of it.
Yes.
I mean, every secular song you sing, a lot of secular music, there's nothing wrong with that, you know what I mean? It's really not against the church, although you don't use secular, you don't, that's not your mission to use secular music in the church, but depends on the situation, and the true to heart love songs, clean love songs, were used, and the folk songs, folk music, and all had its part, played its part, but the church would top it all.
Yeah, I thought so. I was asking, I had a chance to hear some of a tape that was made of Ivy Scott years ago, and he sang a lot of ballads, what we call ballads, and real interesting versions of them. And I didn't know how much he was unique to the community in his knowledge of those type of songs. I had no idea.
In our cookbook, Island Born and Bred, I know you've probably heard of it.
Yes.
There's a small section in it. I wrote it, and it's not very long, but it tells about the important, what we're talking about right now. I just happen to think about that. You may want to read that, of what music meant to the community, the life of the community. It was a part of your church life, foremost, but it was a part of your home life. It was a part of your social life. It just played a part. Your playing, it just was always an intricate part of the whole makeup of the community, whether you were at play, work, school, or wherever, is my thinking. It's something that it just, one morning, 2 o'clock, I was called over on duty, the James Walker Hospital, to do an emergency surgery.
Wow.
We have these little cubicles that we'd go in to change into our operating room paraphernalia, our scrub dresses, or whatever we call them, scrub dress, circulating nurse, or scrub nurse. And like 2 o'clock in the morning, I'll never forget this. I only say this because it's a little bit comical, but it says something. And when we stopped singing, we'd lost something, you see. See, now there's nothing pleasant about getting up 2 o'clock in the morning going over to do surgery. But I remembered the RN. I was a student nurse. And, of course, I didn't pay any attention. I was making my change, and I heard her tell somebody, I want to know what that girl has to sing about 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't realize that I was singing.
Oh, my goodness.
I was just humming or something. And I didn't enjoy getting up 2 o'clock either to go for surgery.
No.
But that natural thing.
Yeah.
And you don't always have to be happy with your surroundings to be singing, but you humming or singing. Even maybe I didn't feel like doing it, but I was doing it not realizing that I was doing it, and she couldn't understand. She wasn't mean about it. She said, I want to know what that girl has to sing about 2 o'clock in the morning. But it was a part of our lives, and I guess it could have been a nuisance to her. Me singing 2 o'clock in the morning.
She probably took it as a sign of happiness or something.
Well, at least she couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
Maybe I think I understood it. It was just, what I'm trying to say is, wherever we were, whatever the situation, you don't have to, you may be very unhappy with your surroundings at the time. That's happiness, but that deep down joy or that singing that you're doing, it tells us something, Right. And I'm not saying that I'm always that way now, not at all. I wouldn't want to portray a false picture like that.
Yeah.
But that And none of this I had planned. I didn't know what you were going to ask me, but that just comes to my mind how even
great story.
in a situation like that. Her name was Hazel White. Wherever you are, Hazel, you probably won't ever hear this because I know her name has changed since then.
Yeah.
But she couldn't understand that. That wasn't yesterday. That was a long time ago yesterday, back in about 49 or 50. Because I was in surgery, I think, in about 49 or 50, and then in 48. So that was that stayed in me, isn't it?
Well, it's
A little comedy, a little comical situation there.
Yeah.
But she didn't know that I heard her say that either.
Yeah,
I don't know what that girl has to say. Well, I was a girl then, I guess, compared to what I am now. Well, that girl has to sing about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, goodness. That is something. Gosh. So, just off the track a little bit, tell me a little about your nursing there, how you became a nurse or decided to, and if that's
Well,
right.
that's, of course, a story within itself.
Yeah.
I graduated from high school. We went 11 years, then we graduated in 11 years.
Oh.
Later, they consolidated the high school. They went up to 12 years. And maybe they did that before this school ceased to be a high school. But anyway, I had all my schooling here. And it seemed to be there was something lacking, something missing in my life. And I had, there was something within me that I was not dealing with. I hadn't reached something I was supposed to do that I wasn't doing. Well, in those days, if someone was sick, you didn't have to be a nurse. If a doctor gave you permission to do, you could give shots and that type thing.
I see.
Well, the man whom I worked with, Herbert Hunter, he was called Bull Hunter, he was a diabetic. And I know I went to work with him when I was 10 years old. I could hardly, I had to stand on a crate, a box or something to wash dishes. He had a little a combination a business there, a little cafe-like. Anyway, I started my work with him, and he always warned me about, he said, if you see me, he was a diabetic, he took regular insulin, he said, if you see me going, if there's something wrong with me, he said, you get some sugar, or you get some syrup, or something in my mouth, because I'll be going into a insulin shock, because you got diabetic coma and you got insulin shock. It's hard to distinguish between the two. So then he taught me to give him shots. Wow. And from that, somehow or other, and I believe the Lord was dealing with me in this area too, that there was something else that I needed to do. And I worked. I did a little work after that to the shirt factory, Moorhead Garment Company it was before it closed, I think. And I just started thinking about that and working towards that end and praying about it, and decided that I wanted to go to nursing school. And at that time, no one had ever, I was the first one from this community, so I didn't have much support.
Wow.
And it had to be from the Lord, because there was nothing here to encourage me. In fact, I was told I couldn't do it.
Oh, boy.
Just exactly that way. You won't leave home. You can't leave home. And you can't do that. But there was something in me, I don't know if you call it a fight, a drive, but I think I was reaching for the goal that had been set for me that I had not yet reached. And of course, when this man whom I had worked with, and he passed away, at that time it had developed into a furniture business, what was a cafe. And so I ran that until I went to the shirt factory for about a month, just before I went into nursing school. When I entered James Walker Hospital School of Nursing, I felt I had finally reached my life's calling, which prepared me for my life's work. Once I started this, my family, friends, and church supported me all the way. The one who was most instrumental in my decision to enter the field of nursing was my cousin, Dr. L.W. Moore. He was always there when I needed him. So that was my beginning of the look into and discovering what I was supposed to, what the Lord wanted me to do, and I feel like it was in His will that I do this. And so I worked towards entering James Walker School of Nursing, and I entered in that and went through the 3-year diploma program.
Where's
Through
that
the college,
located?
Wilmington College,
Wilmington,
and the right.
Wow.
Some of our instructors, they were the ones that some of our instructors and the doctors and the nurses who were in the field of teaching. And so James Walker was my home hospital, and it's a wonderful experience. And I feel like I see so many ways that the Lord used me during that, and still today while I'm not working, except within the community, you know, somebody needs a friend to speak to, somebody needs a little encouragement, that type thing. But I'm not actively nursing now. I'm registered nurse on the inactive list because I'm not practicing.
Right.
But that's, in a nutshell, that's how I got into that. And there again, getting back to the thing you're interested in, singing right from the beginning. Every afternoon, or especially Sunday afternoons, it was down to the living room, and that's with the piano. We were all gathering around it singing, and we had our own little glee club, and it was there again an important factor into
at the school itself.
At the nursing home, where we had our nurses' home, or the nurses' home, and the educational department was all in the same building, and real close to the hospital where we grew up our clinical practices and all.
I see. So you stayed down there when you went to school.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
lived
there's
down
no
there,
back and forth
and
to
you
it.
couldn't even as close as it is. You go shopping now and come back to bed, but we didn't have cars in those days. I didn't have cars like my son had when he was in college, and you know, we had to ride the bus, and it was get out of school noon on Saturday and had to be back the next afternoon or the evening. Didn't give you much time to come home.
No.
And riding on a bus, laying over an hour or two in a bus station in Jacksonville, it wasn't very.
Yeah, I was wondering how you got from here to there. You take a bus and then.
Any way I could. I mean, like riding the bus, or someone occasionally maybe would take me down.
They had the bridge at that point.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's about 39 that the bridge came into being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was everyone happy to see that come?
Oh my goodness, yes. You can imagine. Yes. Yeah.
I tell you, this give me a life.
bet you named 8 churches in this community. Are there 8? Let's see, there's a Pentecostal, Refuge Fellowship, the Methodist, and the Free Grace, Mormon, Baptist. I can't come up with the 7 churches. Lighthouse Chapel.
Yeah.
Pardon me. Yeah, we mentioned that. Okay.
Yeah.
And they have beautiful singing in that church too. You're keen and smart. I had to skip right over that one, trying to count them. Yeah, it is 8.
Yeah, we had. Maybe that's a more recent one. I'm not for sure, but.
I think Grace Holiness was the last.
Oh, okay.
The last. I think the Lighthouse Chapel was organized before. That would be Grace Holiness coming from the east, the Baptist, the Free Grace, the Lighthouse Chapel, Methodist. Yeah. Pentecostal and the Refuge Fellowship.
There's a number. There really is a number. Yeah.
For a small community, yes, there's a lot of churches. Enough people here to fill them all up, I guess, every Sunday if people would go. They all play their part into the makeup of this community. I think is. Boy, can you imagine if your community without any church in it, without having a church? Suppose the church suddenly wasn't here.
Do you feel that attendance people have continued to attend the churches, the island population, has attendance stayed up throughout last, I guess, more recently?
Well, I can't speak in the way that I should about most of them. Yeah. I think we go through periods in my own individual church.
Yeah.
with it holds up pretty much the same, but I think something is happening in our church, and I think it's probably happening to most of the churches. We have a lot of people move into the area, into the community.
Yeah.
And, of course, you have newcomers. And I think sometimes we have a tendency, and we need to watch this, to welcome the newcomers, but not to forget the old ones, you know. It's easy if you see the church filled on Sunday morning, well, gee, this is a good attendance. But I think we need to take a good hard look at this. We're failing to see this trend. For instance, on any given Sunday morning, if you removed your visitors, it would be an eye-opener. I mean, if you suddenly just asked them to step out and see who was left in the church. And I think we are forgetting or failing the church extension. For instance, we are forgetting to get out and evangelize or to seek out our own people, forgetting they're not in church like they should be. And I don't know about the other churches, but I see this as room for improvement in our own church, that we need a program to reach those that are unchurched and have not been reached, but those of our own who have become inactive. Yeah. It's easy to, to have scales over on our eyes and not see this happening until all of a sudden you say, well, where are the people on the church roll,
Yeah.
Not for numbers' sake, but for their soul's sake.
Yeah.
We need to reach out, and I feel like there's some more active in that than others, but I see that in my own church, that we need to, and we are, I think, beginning to reach out with a visitation program, which is very important.
Yeah.
Not to get carried away by having the church full on Sunday morning and forget the forgotten, just completely forget them. And people, for some reason, stray sometimes away from the church, even though they may have been actively a part of it at one time. Of course, the relationship with the Lord is the most important thing, where you stand with that, but the relationship, good or bad, we need to be in church. To improve that relationship, if we don't have one, to be led into finding one or experiencing one with the Lord.
The only other question I wanted to ask is just in relation to your particular church, it seemed...
How do you come up with all these questions without any notes?
I don't know. I have these notes and we've long since left it. A lot just kind of goes on up here.
Well, you got a good head there. That's great.
Well, but I was just thinking about how the women's group in your church did that cookbook, which I know sort of got Karen started on a lot of projects.
Right.
That sort. And I was just thinking there must be a very strong group of women in the church.
Yes,
that's
yes,
what I'm
we
struck
do.
with.
And Karen, since you mentioned her name, she is such a sweet, wonderful Christian girl. To me, she's still a girl. And I go way back with Karen, all her life, and she's just been such a part of my life, and she's just exceptional. And everybody, I think, in this community and a lot of other communities are beginning to realize just how important she is, and her talent, discovering her talent. But I would say that probably she was the main one, as I understand, the one who had the greatest part in the writing of this book, the planning from the beginning and right on through, and she did a wonderful job with it. And it was a project of the Harkers Island United Methodist women. It really was. I guess you might say, in a sense, by the church, but mainly the women's organization, United Methodist Women, who are active and a vibrant bunch of, excuse the expression, bunch of them, a group of women.
That's all right.
Who worked hard at that, and I guess it's still going rather strong. It's gone far and near.
Yeah.
even made one of the well-known magazines, and I think it's gone far beyond any expectations that were expected at that time. We really didn't. I don't think anybody thought it would go as far as it has gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still going, so far as I know.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I don't know how strong, but it's still going.
Well, the combination of the recipes and the sections about the island,
Right, the history.
And different parts of life and occupations, everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a brilliant way to
Right.
put things together.
All the
I'm
little
really
little
impressed.
pieces that were written and all the areas touched on have. I think that the fact that they have a recorded history, something that, you know, if the Lord tarries and the world goes on, you know, these children, it's like in my particular situation of the Banks history that we are so lean on, we have so little.
Mm-hmm.
We did the best we could, and there are other histories of Shackleford Banks around, at least one. But how precious that is, or would be to me today if I knew more about what happened in those days, other than what my father told me and what Uncle Alan told me. So someday, this history, and that little church history there, may mean something to the community, to those who are left behind. Because who are they going to go and speak to? I had Uncle Alan.
Right.
And somebody else had other people. I know Lillian Davis had a history. She probably had resources and people she spoke with. But if they had not been recorded to some degree, where would we go to? Where would the younger people go to know? It may not be important to them now. It's like things I was just discussing with you. That was insignificant to me. You asked me about my nursing training, and then I think about the nurses that have followed. At one time we had no nurses. And think now of Jan Gilligan, Patsy Taylor, Cheryl Lewis, and all the others. I can't think of all of them now. I'm not trying to name everybody.
Right.
But someday it will mean something to the children to look back on these little tidbits that we take for granted now.
That's right.
And Uncle Alan was so important to our church. And there's a little something that he said, recorded, and many other people that just said along the way. The Johnsons, and just so many Davises. You just could go on and on with things that may mean something to somebody down the road.
Yeah.
And the professional people, the ministers who've come out of this community. The little boy, Kerry Willis, the one from our own church, Sherman Guthrie, and Clayton Guthrie, that's such a well-known, outstanding minister, with Kurt Nelson, the Clint Nelson brother. I mean, these things, I appreciate when I stop and think about it. They were our own community, our little boys. Well, Clayton wasn't, he's my age or a little bit older. But those things are something to lift up and build up the community. And many others we can go and name. In every church, if there wasn't a preacher who came out of it, there was leaders who came out of them.
Right.
Myrtle Yeomans, they all still call it Myrtle's church.
Right.
You know, how important she was in the life of that church. And I could probably think of each and every one of the churches and think of somebody that stood out in importance. But when these little boys who played along the shores and walked the roads and I've mentioned Kerry Willis because I guess he's one of the younger ones that I was thinking about. What the type man he's come to be, how the Lord has made him the preacher that he is. And I heard his mother say just last week, said that was the least one. If she had picked one who would turn out to do that, he'd probably been the least of all. That she would have thought had the tendency to do that.
Wow.
This is what she meant.
Wow.
So we never know, do we?
Where is he a preacher now?
In Virginia, somewhere. I think it's
okay.
Virginia.
Oh, that's great.
But they had a youth rally last summer over at Smyrna School, and he was a preacher. He preached that rally that night, and he did a beautiful job. That's the first time I had heard him, but I'd heard a lot about him. And of course, everybody knows who Clayton Guthrie is. I mean, I think he's one of the greatest in our surrounding areas that has been raised up in this community and became a man of God, the preacher that he is. I think he's an inspiration should be to the whole community, not just his church. But he is in my book. And Kurt, just recently, Kurt Nelson preached or conducted a funeral in our church, and I never heard one conducted better for the circumstances that existed. The loss of 2 of our young people who were drowned just recently, 27th, I believe it was, of December.
Oh, yeah.
And he preached one of those, the one that's held at our church, Manly Gaskell's, and such an expression of love from the attendants and the concern from the whole, not just this community, but the surrounding communities. Things like that bring people together. And that's one good that comes out of it. In a time of need, we realize how much we need each other. And there's hope for us as long as if we get all together. Just realize that. Hope for us to improve, and spread out from our own little world.
Right.
And carry the message that we have to carry, whether it be singing or whatever.
Well, listen, I just want to thank you so much. I
Well,
dried up with questions. I don't know if there's anything else you
well,
want
you
to
amazed
speak
me for the
about,
questions
but
you asked me. You have
Oh.
no notes, and if I had had the questions, I may have come up with more intelligent
Oh.
and more beneficial answers.
Oh,
But I'd like to
no.
add to that tape. Please
Yeah.
don't take this off. That I really didn't know what you wanted. What you were.
Okay.
I was asking Pearl. I said, "What is this supposed to be?" I was just wondering what I was getting into, and I know. But anyway, please forgive the mistakes, the errors. If I'm not 100% correct on everything that I said, it was from the heart and from the mind as a memory, as I could recall, because I didn't know how to prepare for this. I didn't even know what I was going to have to do.
Oh.
Something about you wanted to ask some questions, but I didn't know you were going to tape anything.
Yeah. Well,